discussion here in the class. My name's Dennis Levin, and I'm a retired pastor here at Queen Street United Methodist Church in Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome everyone who's watching us online. If you are interested in interacting with us, and perhaps you're interested also in what we do here at Queen Street, and perhaps you'd like to visit with us sometime, please let me know. You can email me at revlev@nccumc.org. That's my ministerial email address. So, welcome. We're getting through chapter 21. Now, last week we had technical difficulties with live stream, but I want you to know that I have done the chapter 21 video. So if you want to go back through the list of videos, you'll see chapter 21 in its entirety that I live stream from home. But I do want to get into some of the things that we were discussing last week, because a lot of chapter 21 is controversial for us today, and there are some. I think it's important for us to understand, especially the context that you have for the understanding of the distinction between the unborn and the born, which is in chapter 21. Okay, that refers specifically to verse 22 and following. When people who are fighting injure a pregnant woman so that there is a miscarriage and yet no further harm follows, the one responsible shall be fined what the woman's husband demands, paying as much as the judges determine. Okay, so a husband can't just demand an amount. There's got to be a judicial determination on that. The controversy that we're looking at in this is that the value of an unborn child is not the same value as a child that is born. And so we look at that and we say, well, this is a lesser life if the child is unborn. What I really didn't get into, and we didn't have a lot of time to do it last week, is why they had this attitude. Okay, it goes back to the creation narrative. When God created man and woman in chapter 1 of Genesis, he breathed into them the breath of life. Okay, now understand that the word breath, ruach, in the Hebrew means breath. It also means wind, and it also has been translated in the Old Testament through the King James and some others as soul. Okay? So the standard for whether or not you are living is whether or not you are breathing. And so a fetus was not considered a life form until it was born and it received the breath of life. Okay? Now, should we be using that standard today? Well, there's a lot of subjectivity about this, some scientific stuff and all, and people have different opinions, and there are laws being passed in different states regarding when does a fetus become viable, and under the law, what does that, are there differences in terms of protection of the fetus? Different states are handling this in a lot of different ways. Some of them are taking an Old Testament approach where an abortion should be authorized up to the time of birth. Well, that would go along with this, okay? But now we know a lot more about the life of an unborn child, and we know more about the viability of an unborn child. And so other states are taking those other factors into account. To give you an idea of how things progress, okay, when I was at Duke, we had a course in dying and death, which I felt like they had the reverse order. But anyway, or death, it was called death and dying. It should have been dying and death. But there was a law in Texas about when life ended, okay? And the law was kind of archaic, but it went with the technology of the day when the law was passed. And the standard for whether or not somebody was alive or dead was whether or not there was a heartbeat. Okay? Now, moving ahead, when we started to get into things like heart transplant, there was a bar fight. A couple of cowboys got into it. One slammed the other one over the head, okay, and killed him, okay? But the person was a donor. So they transplanted his heart into someone else, and it was still beating. So the person who hit him was not charged with manslaughter because the heart was still beating.
Lord have mercy.
Okay? Now, unfortunately for the perpetrator, the person, this is early in transplant, survival rates weren't that great.
This is true.
Yeah, this is true.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, this is not a joke. This is the way
Like
it
two men
this,
walk into a bar.
this is, I don't know very much about people walking into bars. Anyway. So I say. But the person who received the heart died shortly thereafter. And then they charged the guy with manslaughter.
Is that true?
Yes, that is true. And that's when they began to, the state legislature started looking at things more like brain dead or something like that. But, you know, as the technology improves, you get different ideas about what constitutes life and death. Back then, it was very simple. If you were breathing, you were alive. If you weren't breathing, you were dead. Okay? Everything had to do, the definition of life in the Old Testament, if you look at the Psalms and all the rest, is God breathes into us the breath of life, and when God withdraws it, we are dead. Okay? So using that standard in Exodus to define when life begins is no longer adequate. It should not be used. Okay, because this is an antiquated, pre-scientific understanding of life and death. So for somebody to quote that and say, well, abortion should be authorized all the way up to the time of birth, they're, you know, in everything else they're going to say, follow the science. But when it comes to an excuse out of the Bible, they'll grab this one. So just want you to be aware of that. It's much more nuanced than that. Okay, we have a position in the United Methodist Church about abortion, which does not totally repudiate it. Okay, the position of the United Methodist Church, and it's in our Book of Discipline, is that this is a very difficult decision. It should not be taken lightly. It should not be taken as a form of birth control. It should not be used in order to do gender selection. It should not be used in order to eliminate a child that might be having birth defects. But they also indicate that there are circumstances. They don't define necessarily all the circumstances, but they do say that there are times when it's just an overwhelmingly horrible decision that a woman has to make, and that she should not be necessarily alone in that decision. She should be able to ask for help, guidance, and all the rest. So that's the position of the United Methodist Church. It's not an absolute, okay? But it is very, very much protective of unborn children, okay? Just wanted to clarify that because there are a lot of things that you can take from the Old Testament and say, see, this is the way it is. Like, you know, you curse your father and mother, you should get stoned. I'm sorry? Maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. Unless perhaps you were stoned when you cursed them. All right. The next section is the last part from verse 28 on into verses 20 or chapter 22 and 23. You wonder how this stuff just got interjected into this because, you know, we got the 10 Commandments, and then all of a sudden you get into this civil penalties, you know, and this is what happens when somebody passes a very general law. It needs to be interpreted. Okay, the law in the 10 Commandments is "Thou shalt not steal." Okay. Okay, so under what circumstances and what penalties are attributed If you steal, if you commit adultery, what do you do about that? How do you work this out? There are laws, but the penalties in the Ten Commandments are not specified. So now we're trying to get into the specificity of, okay, somebody breaks the law, what do you do about it? Okay. All right. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall not be liable. I know that when Peggy was going through law school, this whole thing about the goring of the ox goring people was always part of the discussion of, okay, under what circumstance? So here the ox gores somebody, okay, and they're dead. So everybody understands that this is a beast, that even under the best of circumstances, an ox is a dangerous animal, and somebody could get hurt. Okay, so if it just happens, then the owner is not liable. Okay, but if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned but did not restrain it, and it kills a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. See? Okay, now here's okay, there's some fine print, okay? If a ransom is imposed on the owner, then the owner shall pay whatever is imposed for the redemption of the victim's life. So, you don't necessarily have to die with the ox. You could offer them a deal. And we can negotiate, What can we do instead of getting stoned to death? Well, I might be willing to pay you something for that. So this is really cool because, it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, life for life, and all that. But, we could work something out. Interesting. It's interesting because here you're seeing the first instance of a monetary value being placed on a human life.
Is this what attorneys started?
Yeah.
No offense.
I won't say that it started here, but I will say that it's the world's second oldest profession. Okay, if it gores a boy or a girl, the owner shall be dealt with according to this same rule. So that's interesting because now we see that the life of youths, children, are in the same category as if the ox gored an adult. So the value of children is the same as the value for an adult. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall pay to the slave owner 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So a slave is not considered in the same category, generally, as someone who is free. So their life is less valuable. They are still considered property, and there is a value placed, 30 shekels of silver is placed on the life of a slave. Okay? If someone leaves a pit open or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution, giving money to its owner, but keeping the dead animal. Well, why let it go to waste?
Dennis,
Yeah.
remind me who's writing this. I'm serious. I'm trying to
Okay,
get a perspective.
that's a very good point. Understand that this is injected into a story about a nomadic people, okay? But the remedies that are imposed appear to have come from a settled society where you have farms, okay? Generally speaking, nomadic people don't have oxen with them. They'll have donkeys, they'll have sheep, they'll have goats, but taking an ox on a nomadic journey, probably not, because like, for instance, what do you tie it to? You know? I-
So we don't know who wrote it, basically.
Yeah, we do. We do. We know that this was written in the exile period where they were carried off to Babylon and Persia. Okay, so they came out of settled societies. And their hope was that they would go back into a settled society.
So God didn't, this isn't God.
Does it look like God wrote this? I don't think that, it doesn't look to me like, this didn't end up on a couple of tablets. Okay? It's really hard to put fine print on a couple of tablets. So, no, this wasn't written by God. This was written by people who were studied in the law. And this was written as a result of court precedents,
Right, things that had happened.
things that had happened, and how did we work it out?
Right,
Okay? So you have judgments and rulings and things like that because the society has got to figure out how to deal with these things. And so what they're doing, these laws are a reflection of how the society has dealt with these things. Okay? Now there are principles behind it that are important because the principles behind it are divine. The principle behind it is you have personal responsibility for what happens to your neighbor. Okay? You can't just do anything you want. You have rights, but when you start infringing on the rights of other people in your community, then there are liabilities involved. So there isn't a distinction here over how this applies to the population. So you could be highborn, lowborn, whatever. This is the law, and the law applies to all. Okay, I'm not saying that it was.
something very controversial.
Yes. Yeah, and there are plenty of instances that we'll get into where the law does not apply equitably.
So you want to say something right now?
Yes.
Go ahead and shoot it out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Whoever wrote this,
Mhm.
whoever people that, like you said, these are things that had happened to them or in society
Right.
to them. And my thing is with gun laws today, because I have a strong feeling about automatic weapons, sorry. But until a congressperson's grandchild or wife is killed by an insane person, nothing's gonna happen with laws. I think it comes from, when they've experienced something, when people who can make laws experience something that
Personal
they,
experience.
right,
When I lived in New Bern, Frank and I lived in New Bern, there was an intersection right down from our house. And sometimes it was near about impossible to get out on that main road. There were stop signs. And our community petitioned the city and petitioned the city and petitioned the city and the other community on the other side. Nothing ever got done.
until.
The stoplight came, there was a representative's wife, a senator's wife. They had, their daughter lived on the other side and she was there visiting them, and she pulled out one morning to go back to Raleigh, and she didn't see a tractor trailer, and it hit her and killed her.
Mhm.
Within 2 months, there was a stoplight there.
That's what happens. That's what's happened with my program that I work with. It's a Medicaid program.
Yeah.
When this was years ago, they started prioritizing diagnoses because because of dementia and Alzheimer's, and there were several Congress people who had relatives or whatever that had dementia and Alzheimer's. And I find that there are people that are a lot sicker that deserve to be prioritized, but not necessarily, I'm just saying, when it happens to people that make laws, that's when you see it. What do you think, Ms. Peggy?
That's true.
And it may have been true here.
Oh, that's what I think.
Yeah.
You know, if this happened to somebody that
Exactly.
was in authority, and so they wrote something in there.
Exactly, that's what I'm, yeah.
That's what
It's just-
happens
it's
when
just
some,
like, even in Kinston right now,
right,
an elderly person's taking an evening stroll, attacked by a dog.
yeah,
Right.
And,
now we got dog laws.
what is the restitution,
Okay, well, something similar to that is being covered right here.
Now, weren't there different sources for these first five books? Different groups of people wrote different.
Yes,
books.
they did. They did. And you have the Elohist and which is called E. They are the E redactors, the Elohists, the ones who referred to God as Elohim, had input. And you can tell by the writing style that this is Elohist, okay? Then there's a priestly class and I think this probably comes from priestly class. And you can see the priestly influence, which is more legalistic and that sort of thing. So there are different redactors that go into this, and we've been able to, by studying the text, tell that different writers wrote different parts of this. Okay, this didn't come from one hand. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about our scripture. And, some people say, well, this is just the priestly writer, or this is just the Elohist. No. Okay? If you take a look at other major religions outside of the Judeo-Christian context, okay, especially the ones that are monotheist, you're going to find that their primary writings came primarily from one person. Okay, in Islam, they are the sayings of Muhammad that were written down by his in-laws, his uncle. And because Muhammad was illiterate, so somebody else had to write it down. Okay, in the Mormon religion, you had Joseph Smith who wrote down the Book of Mormon, one hand, okay? Anytime you have a whole religious dynamic based on the writings of one person, then you don't have any room to debate. You don't have an alternative point of view. The fact that the Bible contradicts itself in many places is one of the reasons why it is such a healthy document, because it encourages us to debate these kinds of things. You can take one point of view, you can take another point of view, and you can debate them. Okay? The thing that's great about the Bible is that it's debatable. What you don't want to be is in a faith where the Bible is not debatable. I was talking to some of my colleagues at the food pantry. We had a big theological discussion this week. And, some of them came from denominations where they're very literal about everything in the Bible, okay? They have a hard time with the contradictions. They have a difficult time explaining that. But I said, anyone who thinks that they completely understand the nature and will of God is a person who is most likely to kill other people in mass quantities.
Do what now? Say that again.
Anybody who completely understands the will of God and the nature of God is the most likely person to kill other people in mass
Who
quantities.
thinks they
Who thinks
understand.
they do that?
That's right.
Yeah, not that they do, but they think they know the will of God.
Okay? As long as we can have debates, we can progress. Okay? We are progressing at a very slow rate. Okay? And one of the reasons for that is that these debates are endless. Okay? And it's a wonderful thing, but it's an important dynamic to any society that wants to improve. Okay? Well, I'm sorry we've run out of time, but I do want you to know that we're going to keep going on chapter 22. And we didn't even get through 21 this time. Anyway, we'll move on. I hope this broadcast gets through to you, but God bless you and thank you for being with us today.
Like I said before, wow. It's good to see all you folks this
Yes.
morning.
See you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Late